tell you a few statistics that might surprise you. Australia has the largest feral horse population in the whole world, very much far in advance of North America. So the largest wild, or correctly, feral horse population in the world lives in Australia. The horse industry in Australia is the second largest industry in the whole of Australia. 1 out of 5 people in Australia are connected to the horse industry. So in 1788, our very first fleet brought our very first horses. They were horses from Cape Horn, and they were barbs. And these are the horses that we bred with. And they very quickly adapted to a very unique ecosystem in Australia, where they thrived on the native grasses. That wasn't a given, obviously. But they really enjoyed those native grasses. They did very well. They very soon ran free, but also they were domesticated, obviously. They helped us exploring the continent. They helped us carrying our materials and our people inland. They actually also very soonly developed relationships with Aboriginal Australians, who very quickly became very good stock people. So that's our gaucho stock person. And it looks like I can start. Okay. What? Yes, I could not help myself. As you can see on the picture, that picture was taken yesterday, just after an absolutely disastrous journey. But you have to understand, this is me. My passion is the education of medieval war horses. I'm actually training medieval performance horses, so it's an incredible honor to be here in Saumur. I always knew I would come here. I'm actually shaking right now. I never knew it would happen before I'm 50, so I'm very, very honored to be here. I'm also competing in, you do the usual dressage, jumping, but turned out I'm pretty good at endurance. So that was my first 80-kilometer ride 10 days ago. We got second place in my division. And that also is something that connects us with France, because France in Australia is regarded as the leading endurance nation by far. My horse just got sold to Saudi Arabia, but the French teams everyone idolizes them. So there are connections between us, even though our riding is quite different, it turns out. So if you type in horse in Australia, you very often come to pages like these, and you can see Snowy River horseback adventures. Very typically, that is what you find because there was a movie just at a time when our film industry became very strong again. It's called The Man from Snowy River. And that led to the fact that many people who didn't really know a lot about Australia, they had seen that movie. And they realized that's something they can do. Furthermore, even Australians who are incredibly urbanized now realize they can do horse riding. And they do that very typically in the Snowy Mountains. It's a place so rough, we cannot take our own horses. You need to ride local horses. And despite that, there are literally 10,000s of tourists every year there, being passengers on horseback to try to encounter that very unique ecosystem. But they're obviously not active riders. Very few of them are. So that was an interesting point raised this morning by Gudrun. The Man from Snowy River, the reason that the movie was so successful is it is partially related to a legend we have in Australia. There was a guy who really lived, Benjo Patterson. He wrote the poem, The Man from Snowy River, about a very brave stockman who rode down a cliff that every other person would break their neck on, and he caught the silver brumby and brought it back. They made a pretty famous movie with it too, as I said. And the legend is strong. We now have a Snowy River festival, where people come every year. That started very local and is now a major event in a regional area, in a rural area. That festival really brings in big tourism masses. You have to do everything that a traditional stockman or stockwoman needs to know how to do. Catch a horse, ride it without a saddle, put shoes on, jump with another horse that you're leading to. You need to transport a straw bale on a motorbike, because those are skills you need all the time in the outdoors. And it's incredibly entertaining for people to visit, and it's very nice too for people who compete. So I hope you now have an idea about that horse culture is actually very important in Australia. It has been a very big part of us as a nation. And today, there are councils that acknowledge that, and so far, they developed official horse tourism strategies. You will notice I dodge around the definition a little bit. I try right now not to talk about equine tourism or equestrian tourism, because there's still a few things I need to sort in my head, so we call it horse tourism for the time being. But there are several councils, and they're very typically in the south of Australia, that have now developed tourism strategies. So, I said, fine, let's look what happens in my area. I live just outside Sydney. I actually live deep in the mountains, but it's just outside Sydney. It's 1 hour for me to go into Sydney, and it's next door to Newcastle, seventh largest city in the whole of Australia, and it's a so-called Hunter region. Hunter region is the second largest thoroughbred breeding facility in the whole world, right after Kentucky and Texas, and that's where all the wine comes from too. And Lake Macquarie is one of the areas of the Hunter. Lake Macquarie is where I live. So, big point was I really wanted to look at, well, what is the current extent and the potential for horse tourism? And what is the opinion of different sort of stakeholders? What do they think works really well and what actually doesn't work? So, as I said, I set the whole study in Lake Macquarie. There are a few things very unique. First of all, Lake Macquarie is one of the largest government areas in the whole of New South Wales. Even Australians don't know that. But our population is counted towards Newcastle, making it the 7th largest city in the whole of Australia. That's because they have us in Lake Macquarie. It's very famous. It has an amazing beach culture. It has a huge giant lake, so we do all sorts of water sports, and we even try water skiing by horse. Everything is being tried. And of course, the mountains. So I thought, perfect area to set my study. And the local council, they are responsible for tourism marketing, and as you can see, they are branding the place. But horse tourism is actually one of the official activities they promote. As you can see, they do not promote too many. So again, I thought that was quite positive. There's a strong horse culture, we have fantastic landscape for it, and the local council is behind it. So I started talking to local people. I basically spoke to more than 50 people, and what that means is when there are events on, you just turn up, you start talking to people, or I was given their name and I called them. And out of all those contacts I had, over nearly 3 months, I eventually selected 10 interviewees. And they were chosen because of their different perspectives on horse tourism. So there was a tour operator, so someone who runs a horse tracking business, who also told me that 2 other horse tracking businesses had gone out of business because of insurance questions in the last 5 years. There was a saddle maker, a saddlery manager, a professional horse trainer who just won the Road to the Horse, so he's very famous now, as well as a competitor who competed. He won the gold medal for Australia and France in endurance riding. So they were very different people, and I spoke to them, and the questions I asked was about their previous travel experience. Well, what have you done? Have you ever traveled for horses? Have you ever traveled with horses? If so, what have you done? Can you tell me a little bit about why you wanted to do it? And that, of course, is a huge problem in qualitative work, because we assume that they do know about their motivations. They might not. Or the answers they might give us in an interview are not very helpful, but still, it's important to ask. I asked them, well, how do you travel? Because in Australia, you can float, as we call it, your own horse. You can travel with your own horse in a car, but we can also put them on commercial transports, or we can use the horse to ride to the competition, so there is no vehicle involved. What were the challenges they encountered? Yeah, and what do they want to do in the future? So I had a lot of questions, and those people had a lot of answers. It was really a struggle to keep the interviews to 30 minutes. They could have easily talked a lot more. And what blew me away is, first of all, the numbers of regular horse activities is much higher than I anticipated. We have no central registry, because we have, again, like here, probably 70–80% leisure riders, and only the competitive riders are actually registered, like me, with the FN, because we need that official license to compete overseas for Australia, but many people don't. But there were really huge numbers of activities, and I tell you, during the equine influenza that really disabled the Australian horse industry, within 3.5 months, they had more than 10,000 events registered, 400,000 horses competing, so obviously they count multiple time if you're active, but those numbers just blew us away. No one anticipated such a huge number of activities. And also in Lake Macquarie itself, I learned about a sporting club I didn't know about before. I learned about a horse soccer team or horse ball team that I thought had come from Melbourne, but turned out they were from there. I learned about a business that hires little ponies out to birthday parties. There were a consultant for endurance riding living there. There were a lot of activities even I didn't know about. And what was very clear is that any of these events are not really seen as tourism. So people tell me, yeah, every year for 3 weeks I travel with my horse 1,200 kilometers to go to a workshop and a clinic and improve my skills. Oh no, that's not tourism. Oof, I hope it is. Because these are the things they did. Racing is the third largest spectator sport in the whole of Australia. So it's absolutely huge. The race that stops the nation, the Melbourne Cup, is obviously very important. Stud visitation, Coolmore and Darley Stud allow tourism of very selected people. But I mean, Darley Stud, one of the biggest studs in the whole world now, yeah, surely they have every single day, they have multiple helicopters coming in and out, and their owners looking at their horses. So that makes me wonder, where's the border to tourism there? We have a few horse tracking business themselves too. Nice black Frisian stallion in Tasmania there. We have workshops where you learn, for example, equine massage or légèreté. So those are the workshops that we have. We have medieval fairs that are getting more and more popular, and also modern sport jousting. And ARC, they're the adult riding clubs. So like in France or in the UK, we have a huge dropout from people once they leave the pony club. And adult riding clubs are trying to be social clubs, but where you can also learn a little bit skills, so you don't have to be completely on your own. So the ARC movement is actually getting bigger and bigger. So you can see they don't call it tourism, but there is so much happening. What they all share is every single one of those people I spoke to, and there were more than 50, they were really frustrated with how difficult everything was. They couldn't find any information, and I tried it myself. If I call the council and I ask, to what beach can I take my horses? The council didn't know. I mean, how are we supposed to know then where we can take the horses? What about mountains? The national parks will now allow access for horses again in New South Wales, which is a revolutionary development, and literally right now happening. They actually had a meeting 3 days ago about that. So it was very difficult, even for very seasoned horse people, to gather any kind of information about what is actually going on and where. As I said, well, this is the situation in Lake Macquarie. I compare this to the situation back again in exactly Lake Macquarie. But in the overall of Australia, there are probably more than 100,000 active people. We have, as I said, a variety of sport. I hope I've given you an idea about how diverse our sports actually are. A big point being is there's really so much happening. In fact, Scone in the Hunter region, it's the capital, the horse capital of Australia, and when you go there, you find a heritage trail, you find a museum, you find statues and art in the public, you find a lot of events every year. I already said that Australia has an incredibly significant economic contribution by the horse industry, somewhere around 10 billion nowadays. It's just crazy. And thoroughbred industry is, the numbers again, just unbelievably, over $1 billion alone in Texas every year from the thoroughbred racing industry, and even that huge industry is actually under threat. So there's an association in the Hunter Valley of all the breeders, the studs, And they try desperately to rescue their studs that have existed for 200 years from the mining, because what mining does, it just destroys the land, puts another layer of soil and says, here, you've got your land back. But of course, grass that grows in the soil, I mean, it's devastating what happens there. So even such a significant industry really, really struggles, because right now it's all about mining. So they actually have developed an action plan, and you can look it up, and it's all about not even maintaining, but restoring sustainability in the Hunter region. So they are traditionally very conservative. For such an association to get involved in something like that, it was quite mind-blowing. So let me sum this up. We have a very strong cultural heritage regarding horse culture. You can see Phar Lap stuffed out in the museum in Melbourne. He's actually a New Zealand horse. He was born in Timaru, but we claim him as ours. So he's very, very famous, like Secretariat, I guess. Phar Lap is really the horse that inspires every single Australian, I'd say. We have shows we put on, somewhat modeled on the Olympic Games in Sydney. The Australia Outback Spectacular, where you have a big show with a lot of bang, and you can have your food and watch that. And they found out that they have domestic but also international tourists there. We have the Equitana, where not only do we have the Grand Prix in our official sports, but it's also about education and shopping and just socializing. So the Equitana is a massive meeting every single year. We also have, typical Australian stuff. Our pub crawl, where you go from pub to drink beer, is done on horseback. So those tours are very famous. And we have the Whaler horse. This is the horse that we exported to India, to the British Army. We exported more than 500,000 horses to the army in the First World War. So these horses are spread all over the world. And when the movie War Horse came out, a lot of Australian children thought it's a story of the Australian horse. They didn't understand that other nations had that story too, because it's a very typical experience. We couldn't bring our horses back into Australia. It was forbidden. So yeah, big story there. So, last slide, just a reminder that besides all that new tourism that you have seen in the products, we also have that old heritage of more than 140 years. This, for example, Bicentennial National Trail, 4,500 kilometers of trail. Now, the hook is you have to do it unsupported. So let's face it, there are not many people doing it, but there is an attempt to make that trail more accessible. However, our culture is also more and more structured, less and less time, less and less skills. So if we really promote this trail a lot, I wonder for whom. I cannot see too many people who are capable of it, but it is another project that is running. So, I hope, this is really said with respect, I hope you can see some similarities between the situation in France and Australia. Of course, we are the newbies, we are the teenagers compared to you guys, but our nation, after all, from the very first day, has a very strong connection to those horses. Our equitation, our ethical questions regarding rollcure and other issues is what is written in the papers, and where we negotiate what kind of identity we want to have and for what kind of horse skills we want to be known in the world. So, yeah, I hope I have given you a first insight into the horse tourism that is taking place in Australia, and it's just fantastic to be here.